you want a hand?
No, you're not allowed to cross there, otherwise you get rugby tackled to the floor.
Yeah.
The top came off her.
That's why it's I wonder if I felt a bit light when I was something.
Well, you look pumped, right? I thought you just bust it.
You
Just touched it. Yeah, you ripped the top straight off. Snacked it.
Who's the chap to the left of Ben?
One of the, which one?
To the left, is he looking?
He's the chair. Yeah, that's all right. So long as you're all right with it. Good. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much. We'll get the meeting started. Apologies for being late. We had to be quorate before we start the meeting, and so we thanks Councillor Creevy for arriving. Can I remind members to use the mic, please, when they're speaking? Thank you. We'll get going. Apologies for absence.
Apologies for absence. Councillor Steve Nelson, Councillor Mike Young, Councillor John Nelson, Councillor Dennis McCabe, Councillor Craig Hanway, and Councillor Margaret O'Donoghue. Councillor Beale substituting for Councillor Steve Nelson.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? Thank you. None. I'd like to thank the Mayor, first of all, who agreed to this extra meeting, which now actually means that he's fulfilled his promise to attend 2 scrutiny meetings for questions twice a year. Like last time, I think we've allowed all councillors 1 question and a supplement depending on what the Mayor's answer is. So I think we'll do the same and see how that went. I think it went fairly well last time. We started at that side of the room last time, so this time we'll start at this side of the room. So we'll start with is this mic on? Yeah. We'll start with Councillor Nightingale.
That's very. Do I need to press anything?
No, I think they're all on.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask you what your attitude is towards the TV ERF development? There was a debate yesterday at the Redcar and Cleveland Council, and this was the result of this was that the motion which effectively would have stopped it, or attempt to stop it, probably wouldn't have done, was actually then amended, and it was passed on to the executive to look into the issues that involved. I just wondered what your particular view is, because obviously TVCA has some involvement in this. Is it also going to be on the Teeswork side?
Yeah, of course, and if you don't mind, Councillor Nightingale, I'll ask for some clarification, a bit more detail to make sure you get the answer that you want. But I suppose, if I understand the question that's been asked, my personal view is that I don't think it's a good project, and if it was up to me, I wouldn't be progressing with the project. I think when it comes to the disposal of waste on an incinerator, I think there are newer technologies that have emerged since the start of the process that are more environmentally friendly, that are more cost effective to the local councils who are going to be involved in this. And I also think that there were a number of technology providers and investors who approached me, as you expect, people approach the Mayor about lots of things, that I passed on to the local authorities via the lead authority to consider. And it was clear to me that there was no interest as part of the procurement process to explore anything other than a very traditional incinerator, which I thought was a huge missed opportunity with the way that waste can be processed, the byproducts that can be produced could be reused in other processes. And I also thought that restricting, which was a local authority choice actually, just to be clear, absolutely it was not my choice or the combined authorities because we have no formal process or role in this, but it was a request and a requirement of the local authorities who agreed collectively that they only wanted the Teesworks site to be considered. And if you look at the procurement documentation, every single bidder had to bid on the basis that it was Teesworks. And I personally think that that has limited the interest and the potential investors who might have come forward with a more economically viable and more environmentally friendly competition. That's my personal take on it. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Councillor Nightingale, but that's my view of it.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Councillor Hall.
I haven't got any questions this morning.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hall.
Surprise, Councillor. Oh.
No questions? Councillor Beale? Councillor Branson?
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, good morning. Mr. Mayor, is it? Or should
You can call me Ben if you want, it's absolutely fine, Councillor Branson. Most people call me
That's
Ben.
so informal.
It's absolutely fine.
I'm interested in the Get Britain working plan because obviously one of the advantages of Teesworks is that we're looking to see employment push there. And so the two questions really that link together is, first of all, do we have a figure now as to how many people we think that Teesworks and the developments within it are likely to employ within the next 5 years? Have we got kind of a handle on that? That would be useful. And also, given my interest in transport, are we actually looking at how we can get those people to Teesworks? Because obviously, from some areas, it's more of a problem than others. And I just wondered whether that had been mapped out or whether we were looking to map that out with the transport.
No, absolutely, Councillor Branson. I'd always be amazed if there wasn't a transport question from you. So on the first point around Teesworks, obviously the original plan that was published back in 2017 was a projection of 20,000 jobs created over 25 years. And obviously we've moved on significantly since 2017 in lots of different ways. That has accelerated now. So for example, in that original plan that was agreed with central government, we made the assumption, and actually central government made the assumption, that it would take around 7 years to demolish the steelworks itself. Now obviously you know that that's only taken just over 2 years to do, and we've moved into development where we've remediated just over 360 acres of land. Obviously the Cedar Wind project is almost at completion and is winding down its construction phase as it starts to employ many hundreds of local people. And just, I think this is information that the committee probably won't be aware of, but in the last 10 to 14 days, I think it is, I think it was the 31st of March, that Net Zero Teesside went completely unconditional in their contract, and so is now committed legally to build the £6 billion energy plant. And there are a number of other investments that are in the pipeline as well that will be coming forward very, very shortly, including a number that I'm working on directly with central government. So a bit of context. I think the direct answer to your question is the 25-year plan to create 20,000 jobs, I think it's ended up turning into a 7 to 10 year plan. And I personally think, because I've given ourselves a little bit of leeway there, I think the site will be developed, still meeting the jobs outcomes that we set out in the beginning, within 5 to 7 years of today's date, is my view. And we can get into the detail if you want, Councillor Branson, around some of the figures behind that. When it comes to the second question, the supplementary question, which is a question that we've been tackling and I've been tackling now for, at least 18 months, is it's all very well good creating these jobs, and even if you look at the construction phase, you look at SEA, for instance, which has been a logistical feat to be able to allow them the ability to bring people on site to build that factory. You know, their peak construction was about 1,200 construction workers in the end. They've obviously started to come down from that as the facility begins to be finished. Now, basically all of those people are coming on in cars. And there are some coach facilities. We've actually contracted, or SEA are actually directly themselves contracted with Cotham coaches in Redcar to be able to get people to park on the edge of the site and bus them into the construction part of the site. Now, if you think we fast forward 3 or 4 years where we could see half a dozen sites across the Teesworks project all happening at the same time, and if you think in 2.5 to 3 years' time Net Zero Teesside is going to be a peak construction of anywhere between 3,500 and 4,000 construction workers. There's going to be a huge problem if we're not careful of physically getting people on and off the site to be able to deliver these projects. Now, hopefully, the committee will be aware that some time ago, it was the years merge into one, but it was significantly before the mayoral election. There was a proposition that came forward about the transport plan for the region. That was the billion, if for those that may not remember, it was the £1 billion plan that was allocated from central government. That went through our processes. I think the committee have talked about some of those projects in some detail already. It came forward to TVCA Cabinet, and on the basis that that allocation is given to us, we in effect have agreed a long-term transport plan for the investing that £1 billion. Now, within that £1 billion that we're getting, or we hope to get in CRSTS2, it includes the enabling infrastructure and transport infrastructure to allow for the delivery of the Teesworks site, because of not just the construction jobs, but the permanent jobs are going to be created. So, for example, there is £10 million allocated in our transport budget towards the British Steel station, or the British Steel rail halt, whatever people call it. We could probably bring that back into use in theory now from a standards point of view. But actually, given the volume we expect it to use, there's £10 million worth of upgrades that need to be done. Now, obviously, we wouldn't bring that back on straight away today, because there are ways in which we have to make sure that it's safe, that we just don't want random members of the public coming onto a construction site for health and safety reasons. But we're looking at ways, speaking to the operator about how we could utilise that to allow construction workers to be able to get to and from the site. Obviously, that's supplemented with the large park and ride, which is part of the Net Zero Teesside project, which is now, I think again, just in the last couple of weeks, all of the planning conditions have just been discharged. And so while there have been some enabling works done under an existing planning application, the newer planning application, or the updated planning application for that site, is now fully implementable. It's probably not the right word to use, but is now, anybody over in the area will see that that's now completely underway. I think there are, I get my terminology wrong from a local council point of view, but I think there are some section 278 works agreements that still need to be finalised, but it isn't stopping the development of the 1,500 space park and ride. Now, the park and ride also supplements the Steelhouse car park that's going to be utilised in the short term as well, where there are a few hundred car parking spaces there as well. And then what we're also looking at is how do we utilise the nodes being at the east of the site, so the park and ride, Steelhouse. There's the west of the site at South Bank, which is another project as part of that £1 billion plan, which was to upgrade South Bank railway station. It was to create, in effect, a mini park and ride, or expand the parking facilities around South Bank station, and the access road to be able to just, in effect, increase the access to the Teesworks site because of the volumes that are going to come in. And there is also a plan, in effect, through the, well, there isn't actually an entrance there, but if you look at the bottom of Teesdock Road, which would be the entrance to PD Ports, the roundabout that sits there, before you, in effect, turn onto Teesdock Road to go up to PD Ports, you'll have seen that the planning application has been given, clearance has happened, and there is a plan in place to create an extra access point off that roundabout that would also create another large-scale park and ride as well. Now, we have to accommodate that because most people around the Tees Valley drive to work, particularly the types of workers that are going to be in the construction phase on that site. But if we can upgrade then the rail services at South Bank and British Steel, that means in effect you've got two public railway stations on the site, servicing the site, and both, all three of the park and rides, well, we call them park and rides for simplicity, but actually they're more, you could almost define them as transport nodes. So there is going to be, there are going to be bus stops there, there is going to be bus interchanges there in these park and rides to allow for bus services as well from the region to be able to access the site. So it's not just about rail services, but in effect we're using the railway station and the park and rides to be able to develop those transport nodes, which means that people will be able to drive onto the edge of the site, they'll be able to get there by train, by bus. Some of the businesses like SEA, which is why the new road at South Bank has gone in, have their own parking facilities, so some of their permanent staff rather than construction staff will actually come on to site and park in their own car park. And then we're also going to supplement, ideally people coming onto site at those transport nodes and then using, and one of the things we're testing, for example, through the 5G testbed, which is in the process of getting set up, is looking at autonomous vehicles, so using in effect autonomous buses to pick people up from those nodes and take them onto the site where appropriate. Now obviously we're running some tests, of which the first one will start at the airport, and we're in the process of procuring that at the minute, and we hope to have one of those vehicles procured and on the site of the airport running some tests hopefully this year. and we're obviously doing that in conjunction with Teesside University. For anybody that's interested, if you have time, if you walk over to where the rail halt is on the airport, over to that part of the estate, you'll actually see the construction of the 5G testbed happening at the moment. So again, we can probably talk, as you would like to, Councillor Branson, for hours on those types of subjects, but hopefully that gives you an overview of what we're trying to do.
It does, very useful, very interesting, and maybe we can take up on some of those later on. Thanks very
Absolutely.
much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Kerr.
Thanks for that. That was interesting. Transport. One of the airport. Could you give us a similar summary on the airport issue where you see the airport board in respect to your confidence?
Can everyone hear?
Yeah, that might.
Sorry, you press the button at the bottom. Sorry, at the bottom, Andy. If you just keep your finger on that and push it up, it will go green. There you go. So we'll end it.
Sorry about that.
There you go. Can you start again, Councillor Kerr?
Yeah. Given what you've given on the transport there, could you give us a similar view on the airport and give us a view on your confidence that you will, when you will become profitable as an airport, given the fact that it's not just about people going into airplanes and travelling to holiday destinations, it's all of the infrastructure round about it and how that you're bringing in the additional work places, etc., and how you see that going to be manifesting itself for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build on Councillor Branson's question as well in relation to the airport, obviously part of the £1 billion also allocated money for the upgrading of the railway station at the airport, not just to access the airport for, as you say, other airports do like Luton to be able to get on holiday, but actually to open up access to the industrial estate on the north of the north side of the airport, but obviously allow access to the south side of the airport as well, where the new south side business park is currently under development. I would just say as well, just for clarity for the committee, obviously we've had an allocation from government of £1 billion. It's gone through our process and we've collectively agreed the priority of those transport projects at present, but it's subject in effect to this spending review on the 11th of June. We know that that £1 billion is currently under review, and we don't know whether that's going to remain the same, reduced or cut altogether. Now, you know, I'm a relatively optimistic person, as you all know. I hope and would like to think that the budget is going to be, if not kept whole, it's going to be very, very substantial, and I'm working collectively with all of the mayors across the country who believe that the CRSTS2 budget, that transport budget has been allocated to all of us, is pretty essential for how we unlock growth in all of our regions. So, you know, interestingly, there's some political dynamic there that while we're making representations to central government very heavily in number 10 on this, it's actually helpful with a Labour government with some very senior Labour mayors that they're making the same argument. And obviously, if you think about it in pure cash terms, they'll be disadvantaged more than we would. So if you look at Greater Manchester, for instance, it's all calculated on a per head population basis. So we get £1 billion. I think Manchester's allocation is somewhere between £4 or £5 billion, which is great for Manchester. So you can see how they would also be lobbying for this. So again, fingers crossed, hopeful. But I would, if anybody's obviously interested in this, keep your eye out for the spending review, and that's going to be one of kind of the key requirements. Now, if it's reduced, then I've already spoken to Cabinet about this. Obviously, we've allocated a plan for £1 billion. I'll make it up, and let's just say it was £500 million that we get, on the hope that we get something. And like I say, I hope that we get all of it. We would have to restart that process because, in effect, Cabinet has a decision that's gone through our process for a £1 billion plan. We can't, I don't think, pick and choose the prioritisation process within that. So there would have to be a new Cabinet process for Cabinet to refresh within the £1 billion plan. What's your £500 million plan, and how do you prioritise those projects as well? And I'm sure if we ever get to that stage, that this committee will want to take a close look about through that process and how we decide to prioritise. And I'm sure you'll have your views that could feed into that before Cabinet make a decision. So fingers crossed on that. On the airport, it's a difficult one because last year, you know, we did post an EBITDA profit. I suspect that this year we will post a profit again. But the difference, and again, that's something that we promised to do, but again, the next phase of that is how do we make sure that we post a sustainable profit? Because as anybody knows that's been involved in business, you know, you can lose money some years, you can make some money other years, and there can be some abnormals that come in that show a profit when, if you stripped out that one abnormal, for instance, whether that's a big lease or an income to a business, then it not distorts, but you can argue that it distorts the underlying profitability of the business. So again, in the short term, we posted a profit. I think personally we'll be there or thereabouts to be able to post a profit for the next financial year. But then you're getting into the difference between potential capital receipts on one-off investments and revenue as well. And I think there are some very interesting investments that have started to happen. Obviously, just recently we had the approval for the funding to put the infrastructure in for the new hangars. You'll have seen Airborne Colours have already built one hangar from previously. You'll see Willis building a twin bay hangar at the moment if you're going down the A67. There are conversations ongoing with Willis and others to build even more hangars, and that's entirely at their expense. Obviously what we had to do was put the infrastructure in to allow them to spend their money to be able to build, and what they'll be doing is paying a ground rent to the airport, so there's no capital cost incurred to the airport for them building the hangars. We lease the land, they build the hangar on top of it, they take a lease for a number of years. It's usually a long-term lease. I honestly couldn't tell you what the terms are, but it will be 25, 30, 40 years for those hangars. And at the end of that lease period, they will either choose to negotiate an extension with the airport to that, or actually the airport, in effect, will take the lease back, and then the airport will own the hangars that have been built by third parties, which in the long term for the airport is extremely sustainable. A big thing that, if you look at the business plan for the airport, which obviously is now, I think, been made available to the committee and has certainly been made available to the local authorities and TVCA cabinet, there are some optimistic projections in there around things like freight. Now, obviously, we have FedEx that have come in. There are a number of other freight opportunities to be able to build upon, which can bring significant income and opportunity to the airport as well. And we also have Draken, who have just been awarded, I think it was 170 million in broad terms contract from the MOD, which we've helped support them build a second hangar, which is already up, and in the next number of weeks rather than months, because of the decision we took at Cabinet the other week, they're now about to pull the trigger on a third hangar as well, which in effect is on the car park where Draken, the main Draken hangar is at the minute. Their car park is being facilitated by the airport to be able to move as well, to be able to accommodate that. So between freight, rents, other income, so for example there are deals being looked at where investors are looking to build solar farms on the airport as well. And just to be clear, the airport has undertaken a pretty comprehensive exercise where it looks at land that can be developed for economic use in the sense of hangars, warehousing, business space, etc. So the south side, the north side, the whole of the airport's been planned. And obviously for aviation purposes, there are parts of the airport estate that can't be built on, whether that's because it's too close to the runway, because as planes come in, there are certain height distances that you have to have clearance, etc., for CAA reasons. There are parts of the site that in effect have been sterilised for quote-unquote development. But the work that the airport's done has shown that there's a whole load of surveys that have been done, the airport have done, that shows that you can build solar on those parts of the site. So one of the plans that's coming to fruition over the coming weeks rather than months is the ability to build solar on those pieces of land, deliver solar on those pieces of land. That will deliver enough power to be able to power the whole of the airport requirement, which again, one of the things that I promised to do was to decarbonise the airport as well. So in effect it was not taking energy that was carbon intensive, and we'll be able to deliver that by the time that's built out over the next 12 to 18 months, and that itself will generate an income for the airport as well. You then have obviously the south side of the airport, and you can see that the first unit has gone up. The infrastructure has finally been complete with the road, the lighting, the utilities getting to the site, and that's now been let to a tenant as well. And on top of that, obviously we've got huge amounts of interest on investors wanting to come to the site, whether that's the south side or actually the 42 acres that we have over here as well. So again, for completeness, you'll know that Willis were talking about building the aviation village. Originally, the master plan was to put it there, but you will see now, as you go into the other side of the airport, that Willis's aviation village is being built, but it's being built at the other side of the airport. And that was done largely because it was cheaper to put the infrastructure in there, so the taxiways and the aprons, than it was to massively extend the aprons here, the taxiway, and do huge amounts of concrete that would unlock that piece of land in the short term. So it reduced the expenditure for the airport from the infrastructure that's needed to unlock those hangars, but it still delivers the outcome that we want as well. So that's a very long-winded answer to try and give you some detail, but fundamentally there are a number of revenue streams that are going to support the airport. And I've been very clear with the airport and the airport board, which is obviously made up of directors who are appointed by each of the local authorities, because the local authorities obviously still have a shareholding in the airport, have produced a business plan that I think works, and I think it will show that one, we'll be back to profitability in line with the business plan that's been produced, but also not only will it get back into profitability in line with the business plan that's been produced, but it's very, very clear from that business plan that the airport have produced that we will not, TVCA that is, be requested in the future to provide any, and I've made it very clear to the airport the business plan they had to produce needed to show this, we will not be asked again for any revenue support at all. So just to be clear with you, the decision that Cabinet took a few weeks ago was not revenue support for the airport. That did not subsidise the running of the airport at all. The airport has to stand on its own 2 feet, and the business plan reflects that. The issue that we had a few weeks ago, and Cabinet accepted this, was in effect we were trying to bring business to the area and create jobs. It just so happened that the infrastructure that needed to go in was on the airport, in the same way that you have in Genie and Park in Darlington, where TVCA put the infrastructure in that unlocks private sector investment, or the same way you have it for Teesamp in Middlesbrough, or to some extent Teesworks as well. You put the infrastructure in and it unlocks the private sector investment. And so, just to be clear, that was not subsidy to the airport, it was the infrastructure that allowed the private sector to be able to invest. Otherwise, Willis, for instance, would have expanded their facilities that they already had in Cardiff, and Airborne Colours would have either stayed in Bournemouth or potentially expanded their facilities in East Midlands, which obviously would have meant that the local region would have missed out. Is that okay? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Hazeldine.
Thanks, Chair. Question I've got, Mr. Mayor, is, to be honest, I'm not trying to make political points. It's an issue that's been a burning issue for this committee for a lot of years.
It's got
the green thing on.
Yep.
It's a burning issue that's been running for a lot of years. There's been a lot of debate and discussion in this committee about...
No, it's not working that way.
It's not.
Can you start again, Councillor Hazeldine?
Right. Right. The question is not political, so please don't turn it into it. It's a genuine sort of information.
Always worries me when somebody starts a question.
No, it is. No, Ben, we know you do. It's a question time. We're supposed to be here non-political in scrutiny, but I don't want you to turn it into a political thing. It's a genuine thing. This committee for a long time has been in discussion with officers about the roles that we have and what we can and cannot do. And there's always been that barrier for us to look at Teesworks and STDC where public money is concerned. We haven't been able to do that. We've been sort of told we can't do it. And at the end of the day, it is public money that's going from Tees Valley to elsewhere. And we've always had an interest about what value for money is being delivered by those grants to these organisations, and how things have gone, and you to reflect on some of the things that's happened. With the Tees Works, we started off with this 50-50 thing, and then it went 90-10 for reasons that I still have yet to understand. But the medias have said, I have to say the media have said, because we've not had that proper information, that the returns from that deal benefited Tees Works more than it has benefited TVCA. In return for that, if the deal hadn't changed, there would have been a better deal for TVCA, and we could have done more with our return from that.
Councillor, can I just ask if you've got a question? Because it just seems that I don't hear a question.
I have, but to get to the question, I have to give a little bit of...
Okay.
Back. I mean, if I just said, what do you think about the 90-10 deal, Mr Mayor, I wouldn't get it, but I've got to put some context in that we've not, as a committee, had that sort of opportunity to do these things. Do you think, on reflection, that the 90-10 deal, and I don't care what government said about it, do you, in reflection, think that 90-10 deal was the best return and value for money for the residents of Tees Valley? If it had been differently, I feel that the residents of Tees Valley would have got a better return for them and for what we could have done, and you could have done as mayor within the Tees Valley. That's question one, being shortened.
Well, I'd be very interested, Councillor, as to what you think the alternative better deal would be. My view has been and will always be, and I think we have found to be proven to be right, that the deal that we've done on Tees Works is the single best decision I've ever been involved in. And to be clear, that is not a decision I personally took, that is a decision that was taken by the STDC board. The joint venture was a decision by the TBCA cabinet, and the updated decision for the 9-10 was taken by the STDC board, which included the leader of Redcar and Cleveland Council. So absolutely, I think it was the right thing to do. I think the investments that are coming to that site are absolutely world leading. You just look at Net Zero Teesside, it is a world first technology in carbon capture and storage that will be exported across the world, having been built on Teesside first, a £6 billion investment that will create 4,000 construction jobs and over 1,000 permanent jobs. And again, there is a lot of politics outside of this room that has been involved in this, and you know, nobody blinks at giving £500 million to Nissan to support the thousands of jobs that are created there, but all of a sudden giving or providing £250 million to put infrastructure in place that unlocks 20,000 jobs all of a sudden is controversial. And I think we all frankly know that a lot of politics did play out over the last couple of years around elections, around the nature of my election both in 2017 and 2021. But if we talk objectively about the benefits that come into this region, I will tell you that more money will be made by the public sector than will be made by our private sector partners, because there seems to be a lack of understanding on how investment works. So, for example, Sea Wind netted, let's be clear, I mean it's public information as far as I understand it, netted our private sector partners collectively, jointly, right, they're a 50-50 partnership within themselves, around £50 million. That's what they made out of that. So for the next 40 years, and just because we get 10%, you know, we're still a 10% shareholder, right? But for the next 40 years, the public sector is going to make nearly £10 million a year in business rates, which would not have come had it not been for the joint venture that we created. So if you think 40 years, 10 million quid a year, £400 million, it's a darn sight more than the £50 million that our private sector partners have made, which again would not have been delivered but for their ability to be able to land it here. On top of that, Net Zero Teesside's estimated business rates, which is still to be valued, I can talk about SEED because they've been through the valuations office, so that's a clear number. But if you look at NZT, the estimated income from business rates alone to the public sector is north of 60, 65, potentially £70 million a year. Now, the net deal that will bring into the private sector partners will be broadly similar to SEER, I suspect. I'm not that au fait with the details of the commercial goings on at Teesworks, but it won't be far off. So again, in 1 year, we will make more money in business rates than they make from that deal. And we'll get 40 years of it, and we'll get thousands of jobs out of it. And what the carbon capture and storage facility gives us is a node that will attract more private sector investment, because if in the future, the way this government's going, and to be fair, it happened under the last government as well, when you're looking at carbon targets, you're looking at things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, when you're looking at total carbon ceilings for industry in this country, of which the current Secretary of State for DESNES is hugely in favour of, for businesses to be able to come to the UK who are energy intensive and want to industrialise this country, the only places they're going to be able to do it is near carbon capture. So actually it will facilitate more investment in the region even further. And just to be clear as well, there are various numbers that get banded around that are incorrect. In grant money that has gone into Teesworks, you're looking at £240 million. And we have been through this in detail, Councillor, with this committee, of which over £100 million of that money was to physically demolish the steelworks. The rest of the money went into the support, actually, of the site over a number of years. So that was money that was going into employing people, health and safety on the site, the fact that we were pumping nitrogen through the coke and gas main at £1 million a month. You know, that was 16 to 20 million pounds a year. Just do the maths, right? It closed in 2017. You got £100 million for demolition, and by the time we reduced the cost to the taxpayer, because that £20 million a year was going on forever, infinite, and was actually going to increase with the unsafety of the steelworks, there's 6 years there of ongoing keep safe costs, which is running between 16 and 20 million pounds a year. So in broad terms, you know, your £250 million is dead cost. You know, the idea that has gone to somebody and somebody's pocketed that is for the birds. Secondly, the additional money that people try to add on, saying that somebody's been given in total £500 million worth of money, well, I can never understand where the £500 million number comes from. But people often try and wrap in the development of South Bank Quay, the new Steel River Quay, into that. Now that's £114 million, and that's a loan. And that is a loan that has not cost the taxpayer a penny. We have never paid a penny in repayment. It's never cost us a penny to do, and all of that is being repaid by Teesworks. So by the time they've repaid that, it won't have cost the taxpayer a thing, but we'll have delivered a brand new quay, of which very few of those quays have ever been delivered in this country before. It's delivering SEA, because again, you can't deliver SEA without the quay, because they're not going to be able to move monopiles other than directly out of their factory and straight into the river. And on top of that, there are, and I wish I could say, but again, literally within the coming weeks, unfortunately, I think, rather than days, but it's going to be imminent, certainly before the next time we meet, a number of offshore wind assembly businesses who will be taking more land on the South Bank, particularly because we've got that quay, which is going to create even more jobs and create even more of an offshore wind cluster. Great for our region, actually, but it also captures the offshore wind cluster that this government and previous governments have been dying to get hold of for the last 20 years. So absolutely and categorically, this is going to make an absolute fortune for the taxpayer. It's going to be good for the private sector partners, but so what, right? Private businesses succeed because they deliver something that people want and is sustainable. If they're making money, that means that there is a long-term future for the viability of that site. The taxpayer is going to make money off the back of it, which I think is also fantastic, and there's going to be a huge income. And just, don't take my word for it, by the way. Go and read the reports that have been provided to Wrecker and Cleveland's Cabinet, Council, Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Audit Committee, who basically say, and I oversimplify, and I'm sure Councillor Nightingale can correct me if he thinks that I'm wrong, but in very simple terms, basically say, one of the reasons Wrecker and Cleveland hasn't gone bankrupt is because they can project the business rates income from Teesworks is going to give them the breathing space to turn around the council. Again, if that is not essential to our local community to make sure a local council doesn't go bust and all of the ramifications that goes into, that's one of the reasons we do what we do. So absolutely, I will forever say that this deal was the best deal we could have got. And just to be clear, right, there are other industrial sites, clearly not of this scale, around the country that have never been developed or have been developed on a very small piecemeal scale that haven't delivered the outcomes that we've already achieved, never mind what we're going to achieve. And nobody complains to those local areas that nothing's been delivered. The opportunity cost in us sitting here and expecting nothing to be delivered on that site and just saying, oh, aren't we great? We knocked down steelworks, we've got an empty site and we reduced costs to the taxpayer. Nobody in our community is going to reward us for that. It's about that economic regeneration that we want, and absolutely it was the right thing to do.
Just before you come back on that, Councillor, I'll just let Emma.
I wasn't going to come back on it, but I do have a second question.
I think it's probably worth mentioning that during the last year, this committee did look at the spend of the majority of the public.
Absolutely.
I know things have changed.
So I think it's just fair to mention that this committee looked at the 258 million, you correct me, Mayor, if that figure's wrong, which remediated the site. So that's where the public money went. So there was it might have been the year before actually, there was a working group that looked at how that money was spent and how that work was procured. So I think it's slightly incorrect to say that you've never scrutinised the public investment into that site in that respect. But what I would also say is we've worked with Connor to make sure that your work planning session for this next year is actually brought forward. It's always seemed a bit late in the year to me, but you're always getting into your work kind of November time, which seems late. It doesn't give you a lot of time to actually turn your work around. So we've moved it before Cabinet this year to give you a bit more time, but we're keen to engage with you as a committee before September to look at the new MDC guidance to make sure that you are very clear on what you are able to scrutinise in respect of development corporations. And remember, we've got 3 to make sure that you plan in, not just over this year, but over the coming years to make sure that you have that accessibility to scrutinise what you're able to scrutinise for development corporations.
I accept that, Emma. Because, I do read the paperwork and I accept what you're saying. My second question, again, just your opinion, Ben. It's the media recently, some of the local media and some of the national media, have raised concerns about a contract with a security firm. Any comments on that, Ben?
I'm not involved in the procurement of any security contracts, so no. If you wouldn't mind, Councillor, just to kind of supplement the previous part as well, because again I think this demonstrates the pure politics in the Teesworks site rather than the economic reality and what we've actually done collectively as STDC and TBCA. the current deal that we're currently doing on Gresham in Middlesbrough Development Corporation is the exact same structure as Teesworks. The council are putting the land in for free. TVCA are funding all of the development work. The plan is, if that is being developed, TVCA will in effect have to take a lease wrap on the whole project because it's not viable for the private sector to deliver by itself. That will deliver thousands of homes, the hotel, student accommodation, all of the stuff that we want on Gresham because it's been sat empty for years and years and years. Our private sector partners will make money out of that. They've been, you know, that is just a fact, right? It's the literal same structure, and this structure is not unique to TVCA. This has been going on in Liverpool and Manchester and London for years and years and years. And so if you take the politics out of the Teesworks site, you will see that what we have done is relatively normal to the extent that we've done it at breakneck speed that people just didn't think we were going to be able to do.
Yeah, thanks for that. We've got 10 minutes, so if we can shorten the answers a little bit.
I'll try.
I think Councillor Kane, Councillor McKeewy.
So, microphone back.
Thank you. Hi. I've kind of got two questions. One of them is very, very brief, and I think I want to just reframe the role, and it's kind of partly linked to what you were saying. I think there have been issues in the past with this committee and the relationship with you, in particular. And I think I want to make it very, very clear that our role is to be a critical friend. And I think ultimately, whether it's been agreed by Cabinet, which includes our colleagues, our political colleagues, it doesn't make any difference because our role here is to be a critical friend. And I think it's really important to say that and to make that clear to you, because whether Brenda Harrison has agreed something makes no difference at all to my questioning of you and her, to be honest, of how decisions are made. I just wanted to make that really clear to you, Ben, because I think after the last question I asked you in the last meeting, there was a lot of kerfuffle and a lot of bluster, and I just wanted to make that really clear that I'm here to scrutinise you and the work of Cabinet, whether Cabinet contains colleagues of mine, political colleagues of mine or not. Our role is to hold political leaders to account, and whether they be on my side of the fence, on your side of the fence, on anyone else's side of the fence. And I just want to make that absolutely crystal clear that that is my role and that is how I see my role. Okay? My next question is really around some of the figures, and I do have a bit of an issue around figures being thrown around about jobs being created and things like this. And I think one particular thing has been in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund paperwork. It talks about 181 jobs being created and safeguarded, and there's two different things. Jobs being created and jobs being safeguarded are two different things, and I think it's really important to be clear on that, about what the difference is there when you're producing these numbers, because sometimes it feels like numbers are coming out of the air and there's no substance behind them, and really from a scrutiny perspective, we have to have some substance behind those figures, and you can't get substance behind those figures if it just says they're created. Some of them are created and some of them are secured, and I think it's really important to be clear on those figures in future. So can we have some clarity at some point on those, please? So it was saying that 181 jobs had been created and safeguarded within communities in place, but it wasn't clear as to what the details of those jobs were, whether they were high value jobs, whether they were low value jobs, those kind of issues. Similarly, in supporting local businesses, it talked about 242 jobs being created and safeguarded. Again, what kind of value of those jobs are to those jobs? Because it's important to the people of our communities. I think the other thing as well, just going back to what you were saying about when you were talking about income being generated from business rates and stuff, I think that's fantastic for Redcar and Cleveland, and I'm thrilled for my colleagues across the water. It doesn't necessarily impact so much on Hartlepool and on my colleagues in Darlington and the rest of us. So I think it is really important for us to kind of clarify where the money is going. going, I think. And I think you need to understand that it's not coming from a political place. I am a different political party to you, obviously, but it's not coming from a political place, it's coming from being a critical friend, and that's what we're trying to do.
So I think on the very first point, I think that, I suppose I accept what you're saying, but there needs to be a recognition, and the way that I phrased the answer to Councillor Hazeldine in the way that I did, in kind of explaining, you know, who approved what, is that one of the things that has built up, and I do believe this committee has been guilty of falling into this trap as well, is that, you know, I am going into a secret room as an individual and signing things and doing things. I don't have the ability, and you should know, and do know, that I don't have the ability or power to do that. And a lot of the vitriol from certain individuals in this committee, both past and present, as well as other political representatives in the region, have purposely misrepresented the fact that I, as mayor, am doing things. And I think it's important, therefore, in the same way to state that all of the things that we've done, particularly around Tees Works and the airport, because they're obviously politically, you know, sensitive subjects for lots of different reasons, are collective decisions, right? So when people and certain politicians call me as an individual corrupt, that objectively isn't true when there are collective decisions made, and I don't see the same accusations being made of our other local authority leader colleagues who've been part of that decision-making process, for instance. So I think it's just important to recognise that it is a collective decision, and that's why when, you know, maybe you can forgive me, Councillor, for getting heated sometimes, that the personal vitriol that I get and the purposeful, and I think, specific misrepresentation that certain people, and to be fair, in this instance, not people in this committee, try to share with the public as if it's truth, is just factually untrue. And I think it's always worth reflecting on that as to how the combined authority works. The combined authority requires a collegiate approach to decision making. You know, I can stop things from happening with the veto I have as chair. Nothing can get approved without my approval, but we can't get anything done unless we can work together. And it's something that I've been speaking quite a lot about with other mayors across the country. And other people ask me, actually outside of our area, why we're getting so much stuff done. Actually, interestingly, you move away from the Tees Valley, and a lot of the conversation about the Tees Valley is very, very positive about how we're achieving what we're achieving. And one of the facts that I always give that people find hard to believe, and I'm sure the committee can check this again rather than taking it at face value from me, but ever since I was elected in 2017, you know, remember in 2017 there were 5 Labour leaders, obviously in 2021, was it? Or 2020, the local elections, we obviously had a significant change locally, 3 independent council leaders, 1 Labour, 1 Conservative, and now we're back to 5 Labour. In the whole of the 8 years now that I've been mayor, not a single decision has ever come to Cabinet that hasn't been approved. We've approved every single decision that has ever come to Cabinet. Now that's not because Cabinet leaders and chief execs and others aren't paying attention, it's not because you're not paying attention, it's because of the amount of hard work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that we get to a collective position that when these things formally come forward, we're in agreement, we get the bigger picture. So I hope that actually we're kind of saying the same things in slightly different way. On the second point about, so I'll jump to the last bit and then I'll come back to your SPF point. On the last bit about benefits, I would encourage members to look at the detail about how these business rates will be spent. So one of the things that I did in 2018 was convince the then Conservative government to set up something called a special economic area that covered the STDC site, which is separate from the Freeport. It's a special piece of legislation that went through as a result of the Finance Act after the budget in 2018. And that meant, as part of the business plan for the whole of the Tees Works site, that any business rates that were generated on that site, the normal 50%, as is always the way, right, will go to the local authority. And that is still the case and will always be the case. But the other 50% that would usually just go back into Treasury coffers stays with STDC. So again, when we're talking about the £10 million a year from SEA, normally Redcar would get £5 million and the rest would go to Treasury. But STDC is keeping the other 5. So we're being made whole as a region, that we're keeping all of that cash in the region that will go back into other things. I know you appreciate that, but I'm just providing some context. The interesting bit, and I do think there's going to be some constructive criticism and conflict that will occur over the coming years as the business rates really start to ratchet. You know, once NZT gets commissioned in 3.5 years' time, STDC will be receiving, you know, 50 million pounds a year, potentially more as other projects also come on, right? That's a huge amount of money. That's almost the entire council tax take for Redcar and Cleveland Council on 3 or 4 businesses, right? And that's all going to STDC. Now the constitution of STDC, let's be clear, and maybe some of my Redcar colleagues might not be happy about this, but if you read the constitution of STDC clearly, the 50% of money that STDC gets needs to be spent for the benefit of the site. Now to me, the benefit of the site does not necessarily mean being spent on the site. So for example, and we're speaking to colleagues actually across the local authorities in a small way at the minute, but as the numbers ratchet, I think all local authorities are going to start to look at this more seriously, is well, what is for the benefit of the site? That's going to be a key question that STDC and TVCA need to answer. I would argue that the road infrastructure potentially of the A66 going through Middlesbrough, we know that cuts off the town. In future years, could you use some of those business rates to bury the A66 and reconnect Middlesbrough town? Is that for the benefit of improving transport links to the Teeswork site? There's a decision to be made. Education provision, all of the jobs that are being created, I know everybody around this table cares about this, from the construction jobs to the apprentices to upskilling of people. I would argue that education plans right across the region, because there are people not just in the Tees Valley but the North East who have jobs on the Teeswork site. That does benefit Hartlepool, it does benefit Darlington, it does benefit all of the areas. And so the question is, how do we improve education provision using some of those business rates, not just in Redcar, but right across the area as well? If I was being personally biased on this, you could also make an argument that as we get through the development stage of some of the work that's still ongoing, but could you use some of those business rates to go towards the building of a tunnel between Redcar and Hartlepool that better connects the north and south of the river?
Can I ask Mayor to wind up, please?
No, sorry, I apologise, but I think that... of course, but I think that's really important, and again, I would ask you as members of this committee, but also as your local authorities, to go back and start to give that some thought, because it's only going to be a year or two away by the time this starts to come in, and what you don't want to be doing is playing catch-up on what we should be doing with that collectively, because it needs to be a collective decision. It's something I think you really need to turn your thoughts to, and again, any feedback on that into the system would obviously be hugely appreciated. On UKSPF, look, when I personally ever quote figures, just to be very, very clear, on my social media or when I talk about figures, I'm talking about net new jobs. I'm not talking about safeguarding jobs. The UKSPF figures, maybe Councillor, I would encourage you to speak to Alec Brown as the portfolio lead who should be taking a closer look at this. I can, without wanting to give you an incorrect answer, I'm more than happy to take this away and to try and give you and the rest of the committee a further breakdown of that. It's not something I'm familiar with. I think it's a standard way in which the officers produce data. But again, we can get a breakdown. And again, if this committee have feedback as to how they would like that type of information presented in the future, I know that the business team would be more than happy to try and accommodate that so you've got the information that you desire.
Can we share with the members?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course we can.
Is that okay, Councillor Green? Thank you very much. Right, apologies for times, we're running over slightly, so I'm going to have to close this meeting because we've got another meeting straight after at 10 o'clock. So thank the Mayor for his attendance.
Pleasure,
and,
thank you.
No doubt we'll see you next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
if anybody's interested, we've got the first mayoral question time on BBC Tees tomorrow morning. So
yeah,
you didn't ask anything, ring in.
I have a question which I'll wait to you on.
Are you being given the questions beforehand? Because I heard them saying that they wanted people to text them in first.
I think that's for the BBC to be able to
filter.
go through. So the way that it works with mayoral question time, both on BBC Tees and the in-person question time, is BBC are obviously independent. They will filter through and look through them, and they'll decide what they ask me. It has nothing to do with me. I certainly don't see them until. And on the in-person ones, we're looking at some individuals who are completely independent, who in effect will act in that role. So they will select some questions, they'll ask some questions of their own, and then obviously in person it will be opened up to the floor. But a bit like today, I don't get notification of any questions, and nor would that be appropriate really. So no, absolutely not.
Thank you very much. I'll officially close the meeting now. The members can hang on because we've got another meeting straight afterwards.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. Thank you.